Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All in All with Alex. I'm your host, of course, Alex, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Leroy Slanzy. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on your show, Alex.
Hey, I definitely appreciate you taking your time out your busy schedule to come on today. Can you give the people a quick background about yourself before we jump into the questions?
Sure, yeah. I'm a principal. I've been in education for about 25 years. Uh, I've been a principal for about 17, 18 years. Was a teacher before that. And I'm a father of two kids, and I'm the author of two books. And I fish in my spare time, as well as coach basketball. Although I've kind of retired from that this season. So that's pretty much me right there in a nutshell.
Okay, I was just about to ask, did you have any free time, doing all that?
Yeah, well, it's Alex. It's summer holidays right now, so yeah. I
Oh,
actually was just out on the hammock napping and set a timer to get out here to the show. Otherwise, I would have saw your email to get on a little bit earlier. So
yeah.
I was napping. So
Yeah. Nah, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. Um, so, so let's just jump right into it. So, can you share your journey from a small town upbringing to becoming an advocate for emotional intelligence in education?
yeah, at a young age, like I was pretty lucky when you grow up in a small town. Like the community's pretty close knit. You know everybody. Everyone kind of has your back. But also what comes with that is everybody knows your business too, right? So, usually when you're in a small town, you sort of stay in a small town. You don't really venture out, and you don't go too far to the bright lights in the big city kind of thing. But, as I grew up, I moved off to go to college and stuff like that. And it was important for me because early on there was a lot of good mentors and role models I had in my life, whether it had people introducing me to sports or people introducing me to just being kind and considerate and developing those leadership skills at an early age. And I think those things that I gained early on in my life, because I was surrounded by such a strong community and adults that were mentoring me and role modeling me in the right way, led me to a place where it was natural kind of for me to dive into education and wanting to do the same. And I haven't looked back. I've been trying to influence the youth and kids in a positive way, including my own children, since I was little. And in the last 25 years, like I said, I've been in education, and I've given back as much as I could, and I'm going to continue to do so even after I retire, because I'll continue to write and hopefully draw attention to the issues that kids are facing, youth are facing around their own mental health, and the climate that we're seeing in the United States and in Canada, because from Canada, and all over the world. There's some real issues our youth are facing, and I'm going to do everything I can to shed some light on that and get schools and communities and school districts and government to open their eyes to see what's going on.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So speaking of writing and speaking of mental health, which my channel, I kind of like to focus a lot about mental health because I feel like it's a topic that's very important. It's not talked about enough. And I feel like people coming on here telling their stories and being advocates of mental health, it'll get people listening. It may get someone who's dealing with something to finally go get that help that they needed, or finally tell a friend about what they're dealing with, and maybe get them to where they're not thinking those suicidal thoughts or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Um, so speaking of the writing and speaking of the mental health, what inspired you to write Emotional Schools, the looming mental health crisis and a pathway through it?
Well, it's quite simple, actually. So, like I said, I started almost a quarter century ago, 25 years ago, in education. And back 25 years ago, you didn't see as many kids struggling with anxiety or depression or their mental health like you do in today's day and age. And I think a lot of it has to do with technology, but I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that parents are on technology more. I also think a lot of it has to do with the fact that both parents have to work. Like, I grew up at a time when only one parent had to go to work, and that was enough money to pay the bills, to put food on the table. And whether it was a mom and dad. For me, I grew up in an Italian home, so my mom was at home and my dad went to work. But my mom was there to drive us to school, to pick us up from school. She was there on weekends. She's the one who we answered to all the time for everything and anything. And now kids don't have a mom or a dad at home because they have to work long hours, or they're not. paying the bills, or the lights aren't staying on. And because of that, you know, they're turning to gaming systems, they're turning to their phones, and they're turning to being educated and soothed through technology rather than through their parents, you know. And the other piece to the technology is that kids aren't actively involved in just playing anymore, you know. And you learn through your parents. So like mental health starts early on. And as a young child, you know, that bond that you have with your mom and your dad, or your brother and your sisters, or your friends and your family when you're playing, that bond is what teaches you how to be resilient. It's what teaches you how to communicate. It what teaches you how to, you know, how to think. It teaches you how to be creative. It teaches you those conflict resolution skills. And you have to work through all of those things when you're little, and you develop those skills. And when those things are gone, when the attachment is gone because both parents are working, or you're not outside playing with your friends where you're learning how to work through conflict, or you're playing together and you're learning those skills, and you're too busy and you're gaming instead, those skills aren't there. And as a result, I'm seeing more and more kids growing up with the inability to cope. And so what's happening when kids have the inability to cope, they don't have anybody guiding them through stress, right? Usually back in the day, or, you know, when there was no gaming, no technology, and there was a mom or a dad at home and family and friends around, there's always somebody there to guide you through whatever's stressing you out, whatever's causing you angst. And that's called co-regulation. And when you have somebody there able to regulate your emotions with you, it's easier to deal with stressful situations. And with that stuff disappearing and that stuff leaving us, kids nowadays can't deal with the smallest levels of stress, and they get stressed out easier, which in turn snowballs. And then boom, all of a sudden you see anxiety, you see depression, you see these other mood disorders, you see mental health issues. And you know, and I don't want to take away from some of the mental health issues that are physiological, like they're passed on from like depression. Sometimes it's a chemical imbalance. There's things that happen in our body. Same with true cases of ADHD, for example. Like those are chemical imbalances, and aren't technically related to environmental impacts. But so what I've seen in the school system over the last 25 years is this degradation of kids being able to cope from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. And the less they're able to cope, the less they're able to do with stress, the bigger the mental health increases. And we're seeing it throughout the United States, throughout Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe. I did a podcast with a couple guys from India, and they're saying they're seeing it in schools in India, that young children nowadays and youth can't cope, and they don't have the skills to soothe themselves so they can cope through those stressors. And as a result, mental health is exploding.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, it's you can definitely. I mean, I do agree with a lot of those things that you're saying. I mean, um, the advancement of technology, social media, you know, those things. You're able to see stuff a lot faster in the world than you could before.
Yeah.
Like for example, like something on the news, like something that happens in, let's say, California. Let's say, I live in Alabama, so let's say in California something happens. You may not even know anything about that happened, but now with the news, with social media and everything, you may know about it the next hour after it happened, because everything it goes like that. It hit your phone instantly, and
Instant. Yeah.
yeah, before it's a lot of things in the world you would just never know, and
Yeah. Yeah. And
now
you know, and Alex, you bring up a good point there. And I think so. What you're talking about is that instant gratification. So you'd think of the alerts you get on your phone when you get your phone bings when you get a text, or you get an alert because there's a news alert or whatnot. Every time there's an alert like that, it has a physical reaction in our body. It creates a dopamine hit, right? And so we all of a sudden, us as adults, us as kids, all of a sudden when we get those alerts from California, if there's a news story and we hear a bing, it's like, oh, there's an alert. We grab it, and we grab it right away because it gives us that dopamine hit, which is an addiction. And it creates that addiction to these things, right? And so that's the other piece to it, is that, not only are we immersed in it, we're immersed in it because it's creating a chemical release for us that we love. I mean, who doesn't love a hit of dopamine, right? Unfortunately, you think of a lot of the drugs that, you know, are causing addictions. They're causing addictions because of the dopamine they release too, right? These big tech companies aren't stupid. They know exactly what's going on when it comes to triggering your brain and your brain capacity. And in the same breath, I love technology. My kids have technology. I think technology is very important. And I don't think we should do away with it, because we do get alerted to new stories that we would never get alerted to, or we find information lightning fast that we would never get before. But I think it has to be done in moderation. You have to control it better. There's a lot of school districts and a lot of places, they're putting these big bans on technology and social media and wanting to take cell phones away from kids. And that's not the answer either, because we live in a tech generation. I mean, look at you and me. I mean, here we are I'm on my iPad, you're on whatever system you're on, and you're in Alabama, for crying out loud. And I'm way up here in Canada, and
Yeah.
it's like we're in the same bedroom, you know?
Yeah.
And and that's why it's important. But there's so many factors that come with technology. But it all comes down to, Alex, like I said earlier, when I mentioned that attachment bond, that relationship between parents and their kids, or that attachment between kids and their buddies and their friends. And as that attachment bond and those relationships separate, that ability to create those character strengths that allow you to cope dissipate further and further away. And as they dissipate further away, if we're not having that human interaction and we're grabbing for this, that, and the other that are providing those notifications and dopamine hits, that's what's causing that mental health crisis. And being on the front lines in a school, I had to. That's why that's why I wrote the book, right? And because something has to be done. Like we have to teach we have to teach kids how to cope in schools so that they can handle stress, right? And as well as at home. But it's harder and harder to do at home when both parents are working, you know.
Right. I agree. So I actually answered a couple of these questions. So let's skip forward. So do you have maybe like a specific example of how prioritizing emotional intelligence has impacted a student or a classroom?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do at my school is, so I've alluded to play, right? And so one of the things I've done as the principal of my school is I've structured and most schools, as you probably remember, have one recess and one lunch hour, right? So that gives kids two times to play. What I've done is I've structured in two recesses and a lunch hour. So I've structured in time for kids to play even more. And on top of that, I've incorporated a program called Play is the Way that embeds right into the classroom. So we use play to try to encourage that activity between kids and between teachers and kids, because kids love to play, right? If you put a kid down in front of an assignment and they have to answer questions, they're getting nothing out of it. I'm sorry. They might do some learning, but after the first question, you can tell them they're nodding off. They're ready to go to sleep, right? You have to do that. You have to do those things to get kids to learn. But if you want kids to truly engage and get them to truly be involved in what they're in learning those skills, like being creative and critical thinkers and being able to develop those conflict resolution skills and communication skills, get them to play. And so by incorporating that early and often, you teach kids how to communicate in a fun way in school, right? And then on top of it, when you start seeing kids being emotional in school, because that's what happens when kids play, is your goal is to teach them how to soothe through breathing techniques, through being mindful. So for example, Alex, I mean, you could probably think of a time yesterday when something ticked you off and you had to take some deep breaths. You had to chill out, right? To get yourself to a point where you weren't about to say something you regretted or do something that you didn't want to do. And we all do it as adults. I went fishing with my son this morning here before I lay down on the hammock, and my line got tangled up. And he's driving the boat and he's going too fast, and I'm trying to do this line because I want to get my thing, and I can feel myself getting pissed off. And I had to stop. I'm like, okay, I got to take some deep breaths here before I get angry at my kid, angry at myself. When all we're out here is trying to have a lovely day fishing. So I took some deep breaths and I calmed down and I undid my line and got it out there and was able to go fishing, and we caught a few fish. And but that's one of the things that we have to do in schools early on. And this is like the second book I wrote here. You can see it. It's called And Breathe. It's basically 50 strategies, breathing strategies for kids and parents that are fun. So there's like rocket breathing, firefighter breathing, snowball breathing, volleyball breathing, basketball breathing. And all of it is breathing in and breathing out. And the reason why you teach that is so when kids are feeling those stressors, they can take deep breaths and they can cope. So what I do in my school is I incorporate a lot of activity that involves kids getting to a point where I'm eliciting that emotion so I can teach that emotional intelligence, right? Because emotional intelligence is really comes down to how well you communicate, how well you critically think, how creative you are, how you handle conflict resolution, how well you can breathe and be mindful so that you're not going to lose your crap on anybody. And so that's the key, is to be able to teach kids about emotions and to teach them how to handle those emotions when the going gets tough, right? Because again, if I go back to those stressors, when I talk about the attachment bond disappearing, back in the day when that attachment was strong and there was no gaming and no social media, you had parents helping kids through those emotions and doing that co-regulation. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's work through this, kid. You don't need to stress out. Chill out. We got this, right? But that's gone. And so kids don't have that anymore. And so, like I said, in my school, I've incorporated that and embedded it into everything we do. And as a result, I have kids that are way less stressed out. I have kids that the mental health of my children is decreasing, unless they come with some sort of trauma from their own homes that involves drugs or alcohol or some sort of abuse, right? You can't that stuff, that happens. But in general, teaching kids to deal with the smallest stressors through breathing activities, but doing it through a play-based way is so crucial to their development, because they don't have it anymore, you know.
Yeah. No, I agree. So, can you discuss the challenges that educators like yourself face in addressing students' emotional needs?
Yeah, I can tell you that, if you're not in a school that puts social emotional learning first, that emotional intelligence first, you see schools, and they down in the States especially, they push assessment, they push standardized testing, they
Yeah.
they push that stuff so hard. Meanwhile, you have kids in classrooms. Like, I just did a podcast with two different teachers, one from Florida, another one from Colorado, and both of them said, they're getting hit in class, spit on, kicked on, swore at. The behavior is just out of control, and meanwhile, school districts are pushing assessments. And so what's happening is, you're seeing, and I'm sure you've heard it down in Alabama, it's happening down there too, teachers don't want to teach anymore. They're quitting. Teachers are burning out. They don't want to do it. And then you go down to the States where you don't even pay your teachers very well. On top of it, it's like, why the hell would you subject yourself to a 5-year-old telling you off or punching you in the face, And so I think the biggest thing that's going on for teachers right now is this rise in behavioral disrespect and everything. But again, that behavior and disrespect comes from kids unable to cope, unable to deal with stress, and their mental health is messed up even at 5 years old. And the only way a kid at 5 years old who knows how to deal with stress is to have a temper tantrum. And nowadays, their temper tantrums involve a lot of cussing and swearing and violence, because that's what they're watching on their phones or playing on their gaming system, right? So teachers right now in the States, and it's happening in Canada too, like we have very aggressive students. And back in the day, we'd have maybe 3 kids misbehaving, and now there's 10. You try teaching a math class or an English class when you got 10, 12 kids out of 30 who are off the walls, you can't do it, right? And so that's what's happening, I think, right now in the United States, all over the world. It's happening, is you just got kids can't handle stress, and a result, when they can't handle stress, their behavior turns disrespectful, and it often turns into verbal aggression or physical aggression. And they don't, and you see kids that their foundational skills in math and their ability to read, write, and do arithmetic, it's just plummeting. Even when they're getting into kindergarten, it's so far gone that and so that's what my message is to teachers. Like, hopefully they can convince their principals and school districts to start with social emotional learning, to start with emotional intelligence, because you're not going to get academic success if you're dealing with kids who are hanging off the chandelier in the classroom and swinging around and telling teachers off. And it's a because that's what's going on in schools. That's part of the reason why I wrote the book, is the behavior is getting to that point. Every time I go do professional development with teachers, or or if I address teachers at a conference or whatnot, it always revolves around them being stressed, they're burning out, and it comes down to behavior. Always. Not how they're teaching, not their teaching strategies, not how they're assessing. It comes down to, how am I going to survive another day?
Right, right. So, okay. So speaking of that, what are some practical steps that schools can take to start implementing your vision? So I know you said, I know you done implementing the extra recess. So what are some other practical steps that maybe some schools can take?
Yeah, I think right off the bat, they have to incorporate social emotional learning right into their classrooms, which means you have to teach kids about emotions. You have to teach kids what it means to be angry, what it means to be sad, what it means to be happy, what it means to be frustrated, embarrassed, feeling shame. You teach kids that. And then you have to also teach kids that when they're feeling frustrated or angry, they're going to have certain reactions. And when they have those reactions, we need schools, classroom teachers, we need schools all to be teaching the same principles around breathing and mindfulness strategies and being able to cope. Because if we don't teach coping skills and coping mechanisms, the behavior is not going to change, because they can't cope with the small stressors, right? So the reason why I add play, and I use a program called Play is the Way, that embeds into curriculum, as well as adding that unstructured free plays, because the more kids have attachment with teachers and their friends, they learn how to cope, they learn how to develop those skills. And then you combine that with teaching it in the classroom, and you combine it with teaching them all those mindfulness things and all those breathing strategies. And what you're going to see is, you're going to see that level of stress for kids decrease, and then the behavior will decrease. I've done it in 3 different schools now, and it works very well. I've done it in high school, and I've done it in 2 elementary schools, and it works very well. And you just have to teach mindfulness. You have to teach those breathing techniques. There's a reason why adults are paying tons and thousands of dollars for personal coaches, or to go to Zen retreats and to learn how to be mindful. We're doing it as adults because we struggle with it. Now, can you imagine being a teacher in a classroom with 15 to 20 kids who can't cope? And so and it can't be just, here, let's bring in an expert once a week. It has to be embedded into everything we do, all day, every day. So when all of a sudden, if you're teaching, for example, and Alex, you probably remember, so let's just say you're in social studies, and the teacher puts you into groups, right? You're in a group of 3, and then there's all around the classroom, there's 6, 7 pods of groups of 3 or 4 kids. And as a teacher, all of a sudden you can start feeling the energy level rise. You probably had a teacher yell in class, "Quiet down, enough," right? You heard a teacher not able to cope. Well, it's what you got to do is recognize as a teacher, it's like, whoa, guys, okay, hey, I'm starting to feel you're starting to get a little bit amped up. I'm starting to feel some frustration. You guys know what frustration means, because we talked about it. Let's take some deep breaths. Take a minute right at that moment. Let's be mindful. Let's breathe in and out. Let's calm down. Okay, let's take it back a notch. Okay, get back to work. Here we go. And that has to happen all day long. And a teacher has to be on top of it early and often, right? And so you teach while you're teaching socials, while you're teaching math. And if let's just say it's one kid who's all of a sudden having a breakdown, it's like, instead of saying, "Get out in the hall," go to the principal's office, just go over to their desk, put your hand on their back, say, "Listen, dude, it's going to take some deep breaths. We're going to work through this together. Okay, take some deep breaths. You got it. Okay, take another couple minutes, and let's get back to work." But you teach them how to be mindful. You teach them how to breathe, and you teach them how to do it. Because right now, teachers are at a point with the disrespect and the behavior. Their first reaction is, "Get out in the hall, go to the office. Let's suspend you, get them out of the school." But that's serving no purpose to anyone, because those kids are just going to either go home, not come back to school, and they're just going to continue that behavior. And it's a vicious cycle, right? But it takes training. Like, teachers can't just all of a sudden pick up and decide, "I'm going to be mindful in my classroom." Like, they need to learn how to do it. And that's what I do. I do workshops all over the place around social emotional learning. And like I said, I'm available for keynotes. I do a lot of coaching too, but I work with school districts. I work with principals, so I can teach them how to structure it into their classrooms and structure it into their school. My school, every single teacher in every school that I've been in, the last 3 schools that I've been in, where I've run the social emotional learning program, every one of us is on the same page. all of us, whether it's a grade 7 teacher, grade 11 teacher, or kindergarten teacher, we're all teaching those mindfulness strategies, and we see a massive difference. Because then any teacher, when they see a kid melting down, whether you're their teacher or not, you can say, hey dude, are you all right? You look like you look sad. Hey, and if you're sad, let's take some deep breaths, and then we can talk about it, right? And because that's what a mistake a lot of people do is they try to force kids to talk instead of getting them to calm first, right? And so that's where, Alex, the changes need to happen. It needs to be embedded. The training needs to happen from a guy like myself or whoever else is doing it in the States. And there's not many, unfortunately, because most of the professional development you see out there is around technology. It's around assessments and around this other stuff. And that's not helping the behavior, right?
Yeah, they're doing it they're doing it in ways that they can maximize money.
There you go. That's exactly what they're doing. Yeah.
Okay.
And the people that are running school districts in the States and Canada have not even been in a classroom. And a lot of superintendents and a lot of those people running school districts haven't been in the trenches with teachers in 10, 15 years. They don't know what it's like to teach a class for a day. Like, I'm not even in an office. I have an open space so kids can come in and out of my space all day long. I don't believe in offices because I don't want to be that guy in an office. I want to feel what the kids are feeling. I want to be in the trenches with the teachers. And so I wear this. I live it and I walk the walk in my schools when I do it, right? I couldn't as much at a high school because the behavior you're dealing with at a high school is a lot more serious. He's dealing with more drugs and alcohol and more extreme violence. But in the schools, though, it's something. The elementary schools, I live and breathe that stuff, man.
Yeah, I understand. So, let's see. So speaking of technology, I know we talked about some of the harmful things about it. So, how can it be leveraged to support emotional learning rather than hinder it?
You know what? I think with with technology, one of the cool things is that you can learn so much. I'll use YouTube for example. If you're in the classroom and you want to teach mindfulness or you want to teach a breathing strategy, just go into YouTube and you can punch in breathing strategies. And as a class, you can use YouTube to learn about breathing strategies, or you can learn about proper communication through technology as well. Like that's one of the things that kids are really good at is communicating through technology, right? So incorporate it into what you're doing. Like it has to be blended, right? Because the moment you take the technology out of the schools, what you're dealing with is creating a situation where kids are bored out of their tree because there's no dopamine release coming from doing math out of a textbook, right? And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues that we face nowadays is that we have a tech generation of kids and they don't learn with a pen and paper and a pencil and textbooks like we did. They learn through technology. And I think the more you can incorporate technology into your teaching, the more they're going to be engaged. So whether or not if you're teaching math or English or whatnot, supplement it with programs on computers or the iPad or whatnot. So that way they're still getting some of that mixture, that fine line, right? And you still need to do the pen and paper stuff because kids do need to know how to write and all that, even though it's getting less and less. But it again, it's like anything. It has to be a combination. And unfortunately, we're going to a place where you have these people making decisions for kids that just want to remove technology completely. And so basically you're going to fight with kids who, as soon as they get home at 3 o'clock, are going to be on their technology. They're going to get that dopamine hit. They're going to be engaged in that. They're going to go back to school and they're going to be bored out of their tree because there's no dopamine hit coming from doing 10 math questions or doing a socials assignment or going through a book that takes you 5 hours to find a bloody answer. So incorporate it. Like if you're going to do a social studies project, like let's just say you're doing it on Julius Caesar, you know how many videos you can find on Julius Caesar? They don't have to read it, right? And find the video. And with most YouTube videos, they have subtitles. You can have the video and they can read along with it. Do you know what I mean? So they're not losing the reading, but they're engaged because it's a video, because that's how they were raised. But have the subtitles so they're reading along with it, right? So, and I'm not saying go completely that way, but bring it, mesh it into everything that you're doing and have technology in there and allow, like in the senior grades, like I don't have any, kids aren't allowed to have cell phones in my elementary school. They're banned, which is great, but I have technology. In the high school, however, when kids get to grade 10, 11, and 12 and they have cell phones, teach them how to use that thing as a tool. With my phone right here, with my cell phone right here, I can do my whole job on my phone. So why can't we teach kids in grade 10 and 11, 12 to use this thing to get through high school, to get through college, right? On all of that stuff. And I just think it's again one of those things that has to be supplemented and not one or the other. And people make that mistake all the time. It's we either have to do this or do that. And it's like, no, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sometimes you see things that were done in the 50s that will still work in 2025. And you see some things that are done in 2025 that should be there. And nothing, if something works and it works well, keep it. Just bring it all together.
Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Make it better if you want to, but you don't need to fix it, right?
Yeah, and I agree with that as far as teaching them how to get through high school with it, because when they get to the real world, they're going to be living their life through the phone anyway. So why not?
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, why not go ahead and get them ready for the because a lot of the education, you're not getting a lot of the stuff that you need when you get ready for the real world anyway. Like, for example, here in the States, when you go through high school, they don't teach you anything about credit. They don't teach you anything about taxes. They don't teach you anything about, jobs and so on and so forth. Like, they don't teach you anything that you need to know. I mean, yeah, they're teaching you about, history and, math, science, things like that, which those things, you're already learning that as you grow up from kindergarten all the way up. So you're constantly learning some of the same things. But as you get older, once you hit 11th, 12th grade, those junior and senior years, I feel like you should start learning more of, hey, when you get out there, you're going to have to start working. You're going to have to start paying bills. You're going to have to start doing this. You're going to have to learn how to budget. You're going to have to learn, we don't learn any of those things. And
a good example, Alex. So my son, he's in grade 12. He's graduated. He graduated in June. So he's got on this kick where he started an e-commerce store on Shopify. He's now curious about mortgages. He's curious about, and I'm thinking to myself, here I am, my kid's in grade 12, and I'm like, why aren't they doing an e-commerce store in grade 10, 11, and 12? Why aren't they capitalizing on sales? Why aren't they learning about, profits and losses and budgets and mortgages and interest rates? And but they're not. And I get it. I get, because I'm an educator, right? So I get why we teach social studies. I get why we teach math and creating that foundational piece. But one of the things that we're not teaching, and we're getting better here in my province, here in British Columbia, we're teaching kids how to be creative and critical thinkers. And that's what has to happen more so, rather than just teaching, and I love American history. I have an American history degree. I did that in college because I just find you guys it's nuts down there with your politics, and it's very entertaining, right? And so, and it's been like that historically. So it was entertaining for me, but has an American history degree served me anything in terms of my life? Zero. Nothing. I did a major in it. Like, I got a major in American history, bachelor of arts. It's done nothing for me, right? Everything that I've learned basically on the job, and it comes down to relationships. I've had to learn about leadership. I've done some odd leadership courses and stuff, but when I was in high school, like, I'm sorry, nothing that I learned in high school prepared me, well, except I learned how to work hard. You know what I mean? And I guess that's what school does, is it teaches kids how to work hard. It teaches us how to be laborers. It's like, here you're going to go to school 6 to 7 hours a day. So when you get that job in the factory, you go punch in, go put your 8 hours and leave, and you punch out. But it's not doing anything for that creative and critical thinking, right? And it's starting to shift. Like, here in British Columbia, Canada, our model is shifting to more of what they're doing in Finland, who's #1 in the world in education, right? And it's developing critical and creative thinkers, because those critical and creative thinkers are the ones who are going to take over the world and make all the money. Well, the rest of these school districts that are still teaching, teaching to the test and all this stuff are going to fall further and further behind, right? But you nailed it. It's got to shift, and I'm thankful because it's shifting where I am, but it needs to shift all over the world, right? And I'm hopefully, my book and my next book that I'm writing is going to have that impact. But yeah, man, it's In 25 years, I've been watching this, and and I have relatives in Italy, and at least over there, my cousins, by the time they got to grade 10, they were able to branch off into, if they're going to be a lawyer. They started doing coursework in grade 10 around being a lawyer. My cousin was, they own an apple farm, so he wanted to go into farming. Grade 10, he streamed off into agriculture, right? He didn't have to do any more of that other crap. And, and then I had another cousin who wanted to go into real estate and whatnot. And so grade 10, he started into imports and exports. And so in Europe, they've got this mindset of like, what do you want to, by grade 10, you're 15, 16, what do you want to be when you grow up? Then let's stream you. We're in North America where it's like, no, you need to still take English. You still need to take socials. You still need to, and so hopefully one day there'll be a stronger shift. But as long as these politicians and these guys making money off of sending kids to college and stuff or running the show, it won't change, especially in the States, in Canada too. College is big business, right? Yeah. It's big business. And you look in Europe, university's free. And it's free because they're trying to get people into the job market to make money for companies. Whereas in Canada and the United States, it's like, let's keep taking money from these families to make these kids, even when you go to college, your first 2 years of college, you're taking stupid classes that have nothing to do with what you want to be when you grow up, right? So yeah, the system's a mess, man. It's a mess.
You know what? I think it's going to change though, because here in the last, I don't know, I would say 10 years or so, the world has changed a lot where entrepreneurship has become really big. People are able to make a living off of doing podcasts, or make a living off of run their own businesses and things like that. Stuff that you don't need a degree to do. So I feel like the more people that are brave enough to just get out there and do it, and without having to try to, because I mean, let's face it, college is expensive. Most people can't afford it.
Yeah.
So you have to go another route. You're either going to have to go work for a company and just work until you die, or if you do have the money to go to college, you're going to go, or either you're going to just be an entrepreneur, or you find some kind of other way to make it. So I think it's just going to be less and less people go to college, because more and more places aren't going to require you to have a college education. So
I agree. And Alex, it's funny that you bring that up. So I wrote the book, right? I don't have a PhD. I do have a master's degree, but I don't have a PhD. I've had friends say to me, why didn't you just do your PhD? I'm like, because my PhD would have cost me 16 grand to get the letters PhD behind my name. For what purpose? I wrote a book and I'm making money off of a book that I didn't need a PhD for. I don't need it, And so I've actually I'm writing a third book. Actually, my third book is about, credentials and how they really don't have too much of an impact on leadership and skill and making money and stuff like that, right? But like I said before, my son's starting an e-commerce a business online, but he should have started that in grade 10 if the schools were doing it properly, right? And like you said, most families can't afford it. Like I do pretty good as a principal, and I'm struggling to put my kid through school. Like he's gonna have to get student loans, and at the end of thankfully I've convinced him. I'm like, you go to school. I said, you're not taking general arts. You need to go and get a ticket, right? Go and become he's going to become a kinesiologist so he can actually have a job that he can work for himself, not for the man. Because the moment you leave college and you go work for somebody, so are you going to make what, $35 an hour for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
Living on that pension, rather than, like you having a podcast or being creative and trying to figure out a way to do it on your own, right? So it's got to change, man. It's got to change.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So, so let's see. So, okay. So you said you're working on another book.
Yeah.
What's the name of your new book that you're working on?
Well, it's called Beyond Credentials. I haven't figured out what the last half of the name is, but basically it's an analysis of does credentials actually translate into good leadership skills? Just because you have a PhD or a master's, does that mean you're going to be good at running a business or that you're going to be a good leader? And basically, I'm analyzing the fact that leadership is much more than just letters behind your name. It's how you are with relationships, how you treat your human beings, how organized, how structured you are. And those things you can learn while you go to college and if you're going to get a master's or a PhD in leadership. But at the end of the day, I've worked for too many people who have doctorates that I'd like to throw out a window, and they can't get me to do anything because they don't inspire you,
I agree.
right? And a leader should inspire you. They should make you want to do more and more and more, and because I'm at that point with teachers too, right, where teachers are burned out because the leaders in their schools are terrible. They're toxic, right? They're narcissistic, they're egotistical, and I tell teachers, leave. There's so many job openings now. If you hear that there's a principal down the street who's a great leader, leave. Go work for that guy or that girl. Leadership isn't just because you go and do a master's or you have some credentials behind your name doesn't mean you can lead. And so that's what my next book, it's an analysis of leadership and what makes a good leader. And it's about the fact that just because you have some letters behind your name doesn't mean you deserve to be respected and that you're going to be this world's greatest leader, because that's not how leadership works.
Okay. So if anybody in my audience watches this and they want to whether they're a teacher or whether they're a principal or whether they want to reach out to the school system to see about getting you to help incorporate what you do into their curriculum, how do they go about doing that? Do you have like a website or something they go to?
Yeah, I do. It's www.leroyslanzy.com. So my first and last name.com. That's just, and my email's the same, leroyslanzy@gmail.com. And it costs no money to email me. It costs no money to reach out, ask questions. I'll do an email exchange back and forth to help teachers along, because that's the other piece is it is a business for me, but I also want to help people out. So yeah, they can reach out to me through my website or through my email address. I'm on Facebook as well. They can find me on Facebook. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm also on LinkedIn. Just Leroy Slanzy. Just Google Leroy Slanzy. You'll find my website. You'll find me. If you want to know about the Play is the Way program, that's www.playistheway.ca. And it's a huge program in Australia and New Zealand as well. And it's getting bigger and bigger here in Canada. And I am planning on heading down to the States too. So, but yeah, Leroy Slanzy, just spell it right. And you'll find me Leroy Slanzy at Gmail or leroyslanzy.com.
Okay. Perfect. So I definitely want to tell you I appreciate you for taking the time out your busy schedule. I know you have a lot going on, sleeping on your hammock and everything. Yeah, I know you got a lot going on though, but yeah, what you're doing is definitely amazing. It's definitely needed, and I mean, I hope that that we're alive long enough to see the change. But even if we're not, hopefully the change still comes.
Yeah, and Alex, one thing too, parents can reach out to me too. I do parent coaching, but I'm more than happy to have a conversation with parents because they're struggling in their own homes too. This isn't just a school situation, right? And that's part of what I do is I help parents deal with schools because I know schools piss parents off to no end as well. And I can help them meander through the school system so they can get better results from working with teachers and principals and whatnot. Because there is an art to it, unfortunately, but I'm here for parents as well. Okay. And I appreciate the kind words, man. Anything I can do to help, I'm here.
Oh, yes, sir. So everybody that's watching, you guys go contact Leroy for any question that you may have. Go support him. Go recommend him to any school systems that you know of that can benefit from this. But you guys have just watched another episode of All Now with Alex, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.